Sometimes you just have to read the Bible backwards in order to make sense of it. Oh, I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking one of two things. You're either thinking, oh, that Kelvin Holdsworth is talking nonsense in the pulpit. Or alternatively, you're thinking, oh, that Kelvin Holdsworth is talking nonsense in the pulpit again. But stick with me for 10 minutes. Sometimes you have to read the Bible backwards in order to make sense of it. You see, the thing is, the Bible is a collection of many books, 66 books if you count one way, but then you can add the apocryphal books as well. And indeed, remember that some of the books are already compilations of writings from different authors and different times. There's a lot of stuff in there. And they come to us with the wisdom of the ages. They were gathered together in a particular way and put together in a particular order. And that order made sense to those who established the canon. That's the way the books are gathered. However, the books were not written in the order that we find them bound in our Bibles. And yet, because we are so used to books that begin at the beginning and have a middle and then end at the end, it's very easy to think that the Bible is like that. An unfolding narrative from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation. It's very easy to think that we should begin at the beginning and read it to the end. But the trouble is, there is a lot of psychological presumptions that we end up with because of that. And sometimes they may get in the way of us interpreting the texts. For when human beings read a text, they very often try to interpret it in the order in which it comes. You can actually see that happening in the second reading that we had this morning, where the author of the first letter of Peter tries to kind of mash up the story of Noah and the newly established practice of baptizing people and come up with a theology that makes sense of those two things happening. Oh, it's all about water. This is the story. Very many people who read the Bible, or at least who read the bits that we're familiar with, try to put it together in their heads, in their minds, as some kind of great story of salvation. It begins with the Garden of Eden and the stories of Genesis, long, long ago, in the past, in the mythic past, way, way back. And it ends in the garden at the end of the book of Revelation. Sometime, who knows how far ahead, Revelation being that way, the Garden of Eden being that way. One garden at the beginning of time, one garden at the end of time. It's all very neat. And so somehow we have planted in our minds the idea that the Genesis stories, the Garden of Eden and Noah and the Tower of Babel, all that kind of thing, are all going on somehow in the past. The mythic past, maybe. Even those of us who don't think of this as a historical description of how things happened can very easily think of those stories as being about our origins, about our beginnings, about something that's going on way back when. Similarly, when we read the end of the Bible, the Apocalypse, we can think of it as a testimony or a prophecy of, well, the way things are and the way they're about to be, the way things will end up. But we know that the God that we worship is outside of the constraints of time. So maybe there are other ways of conceiving of these things. And I want to invite you today to turn these things around and turn salvation history, if that's the way you conceive it, a little bit on its head for just a few moments. And see if that helps you understand something new. We tend to imagine, as I said, that the stories of Genesis, including Noah's story, the saga of Noah and the ark and the flood and all of that, come from Genesis and so are some way in the past. Maybe it's not that way. I invite you to swap over the past and the future and the way you think about them in the text today. Because if Revelation is about anything, I think it may be about telling us how things really were way back when. What if the story of Noah and the flood and of God's compassion in that moment is telling us more about how things are right now and how they could turn out to be sometime soon? For the apocalyptic writings of Revelation do indeed tell us a huge amount about what it was like to be persecuted as a Christian in the very first years of the new faith as it became established. The tribulation was real way back when. The dream of a garden when the Lord would wipe away the tear from every eye was an amazing dream. But that was way back when. Now think of the stories of Genesis and of Noah's saga in particular as being something about now and the way things really are and the way things might develop from here on in. Noah's world faces being wiped out by a flood, the original flood of biblical proportions. The world being wiped out and made uninhabitable because of corruption and violence. Human selfishness, the root cause of the wipeout of humanity. In an age where we are now familiar and told on a weekly basis about what is happening to our climate, does that not sound familiar? We live in the face of the threat that humanity might not survive human activity. And not just humanity, many of the creatures of the earth are at risk. Some of them are being lost. As we begin Lent this year, I ask you to reflect on the story of Noah and ask yourself instead of what did it have to do way back when, but what does it have to do with us right now? Now, Noah's Ark bobs around right above my head. It's up in here in the murals twice. Come and have a look at the end. Whenever anyone preaches here, they've got Noah's Ark right above their heads. But I invite you to allow that ark to float around in your imagination this week as you think about that reading this morning. For we are at great risk. Should we carry on polluting this world, then we human beings do face calamity, a flood, a wipeout, a deluge. The lectionary compilers offer us just a snippet of Noah's story this week, and it's the best bit. It's the bit where the clouds part and the sun comes out and the rainbow is there in the heavens, proclaiming that the existential threat to humanity is over forever. Keep that picture as a dream and a hope and a prayer. But if we want to get to see that rainbow, then things will need to change. Can we read this story as though it is about the present, not the past? If we do, it will change who we are and what we do. And that is what Lent is partly about, changing who we are and what we do. This Lent, I know that some people are taking up things that will help contribute to tackling the climate crisis. Eating less meat during Lent, perhaps, or using less plastic, or eating locally sourced food. And all of these things are good to do. But they are symbols only of the much greater turnaround that the world needs. Turning things completely over, making things different, turning things around. One of the themes of Lent. And these are spiritual issues. There is a need to preach the urgency of this crisis, to tell the whole world that things need to be turned upside down and put together differently. We need to imagine new ways of being. These are spiritual things. The way we think about salvation history and spiritual history, they matter hugely in how we tackle the crisis that the world faces, which is why I invite you to think about that story differently today. The crisis means taking our thinking and turning it inside out and upside down. It is possible that we will get to see that rainbow as a human race if the world in which human greed dominates everything is replaced by something new, a whole new order. We get to see that rainbow if violence is undermined and destroyed by human cooperation and mutual love and respect. And we get to see that rainbow if we believe that every living thing is precious in the sight of God, and not only believe that, but behave as though we believe it too. Out of love and compassion, God has given us these stories that can save the world. We preach things that are about salvation. Let us read these stories anew, and let us imagine and reimagine a world where we behave as though every living thing is holy, as God seems to do.